See discussion stats and author profiles for this publication at http://www.researchgate.net/publication/233169450. Attitudes towards Growth Management in Florida Comparing Resident Support in 1985 and 2001. Article in Journal of the American Planning Association December 2004. Impact Factor 2.04 DOI 10.1080/01944360408976393. Citations. Downloads. Views. 10. 7. 75. Two authors including, Timothy Chapin, Florida State University. 25 publications, 158 citations. See profile. Available from Timothy Chapin, retrieved in 08 September 2015. 443. Attitudes towards Growth Management in Florida. To date, no study has investigated whether resident attitudes towards growth management change over time and, if so, in what ways. This study begins to fill this gap by investigating Floridians' attitudes towards growth management at two key points in time, in 1985, as Florida's groundbreaking growth management legislation was being passed, and, 2, in 2001, when substantial revisions to the state's growth management approach were being considered. We found that while overall support for controlling growth remains high, support for government intervention in growth management has diminished. Overall, Florida's experience indicates that popular support for growth management is likely to persist in mature growth management states, even in the face of frustration with government implementation of such efforts and the emergence of political regimes that are less supportive of them. Timothy S. Chapin is an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Florida State University. His ongoing research includes an evaluation of the effectiveness of Florida's growth management approach in promoting central city redevelopment and limiting development in high-hazard coastal areas in the state. Charles E. Connerly is William G. and Bud Bell Professor and Chair of Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Florida State University. He is author of the forthcoming University of Virginia Press book The Most Segregated City in America, City Planning and Civil Rights in Birmingham, IG 20 ipso. Journal of the American Planning Association, Volume 70, Number 4, Autumn 1004. Registered Trademark American Planning Association, Chicago, IL. Comparing Resident Support in 1985 and 2 CCI. Timothy S. Chapin and Charles E. Connerly. R. Researchers have long been interested in resident attitudes towards growth management. See, e.g., Bollins, 1990, Connerly, 1986, Connerly and Frank, 1986, Dowell, 1980, Nape, 1987. While this research has yielded some conflicting results, Deacon, 1989, Gale and Hart, 1991, there is evidence that certain factors, e.g., higher socioeconomic status, interest in environmental issues, and perceived need for growth controls, help to predict support for growth management initiatives. This research is important in that identifying the factors that predict support for growth management can help planners galvanize support for these initiatives amongst pro-growth management groups. While analyses of resident attitudes towards growth management are prevalent, to date no study has investigated whether resident attitudes have changed over time and, if so, in what ways. This study begins to fill this gap by investigating Floridians' attitudes towards growth management at two key points in time, in 1985, as Florida's groundbreaking growth management legislation was being passed by the legislature, and, 2, in 2001, when substantial revisions to the state's growth management approach were being considered. This article therefore provides some insight into the changes in resident support for growth controls over time. Florida is also a useful state to study because its long-established, state-level approach to growth management has served as a model to other states pursuing similar efforts. To preview the findings of this study, analysis indicates that in 2001 Florida residents continued to support growth management, albeit at a slightly lower level than in 1985. Further, the broad-based support for growth management that existed in 1985 had diminished and, by 2001, support varied much more markedly across the population. While overall support for controlling growth has remained high, support for government intervention in growth management has diminished across almost all population subgroups. Florida's experience provides insights into how resident support for growth management can change as systems age, flaws are recognized, revisions are made, and places continue to grow despite state-mandated growth controls. The experience of Florida points to the need for planners to monitor support for these complex and long-term oriented policy interventions. The article opens with a brief discussion of Florida's growth management context. The next section summarizes the data and methodology used for this. 444 Journal of the American Planning Association, Autumn 2004, Volume 70, No. 4. Study. The results of our analyses are then presented. In closing, we discuss potential reasons for the decline in support for growth management in the state between 1998 and 2001, placing them in the context of ongoing efforts to remake the state's growth management system. Data and methodology. The data employed in this study came from the Florida Annual Policy Survey, FAPS, which has been conducted by the Florida State University Survey Research Lab annually since 1979, Florida State University Survey Research Lab, 2004. This survey is intended to monitor the policy interests and attitudes of Floridians on issues of importance to state and local governments. In addition to questions included annually in the FAPS, in 1985 and 2001 the survey incorporated a panel of questions on growth management, Florida State University Survey Research Lab, 1985, 2001. These questions probed resident attitudes about the need to stop or limit growth in their community and whether or not government should play a role in managing growth. Responses to the survey were generated from a random digit dial telephone survey of Floridians 18 years old or older. Survey results were obtained from a representative sample of 983 and 1,085 residents in 1985 and 2001, respectively. 2 statistical measures were employed in the analysis. For each year's data, simple chi-square tests were performed to identify any variance in resident attitudes across demographic, economic, and political variables. Similar to the methodology of Gale and Hart, 1992, this analysis provides insight into how attitudes towards growth management vary across the population at a given point in time. In order to ascertain changes in attitude over time, difference of proportion tests were employed. This test calculates whether any changes between 1985 and 2001 in the proportion of respondents indicating a given response are statistically significant. The Florida management context. In 1985, the state of Florida passed one of the most innovative growth management programs this country has ever seen. Benzotic and Gale, 2001, Porter, 1998. The Florida Growth Management Act, Local Government Comprehensive Planning and Land Development Regulation Act, 1985, called for state oversight of local planning efforts, required consistency between formerly disconnected local plans, and established infrastructure concurrency, a mandate specifying that certain urban services must be in place prior to development. The legislation also outlined a detailed process for resident input into local planning decisions. Although in many ways this was a landmark piece of legislation, Florida's growth management system has not been without its problems. Initially heralded around the country as one of the most comprehensive and potentially most effective attempts at managing growth, this system has experienced mixed success at guiding growth. Porter, 1998, Whites, 1999. Despite its requirement of infrastructure concurrency, the state chose not to provide sufficient resources to address infrastructure backlogs or the need for new infrastructure. Benzotic and Eel, 2001, Koenig, 1990, Pelham, 1992. The system has also been criticized for placing the state in the role of a command and control entity, rather than the role of a facilitator and advisor to localities on planning issues. Florida Growth Management Study Commission, 2001. Over time, these criticisms have prompted reforms to the state's growth management system, including relaxation of concurrency standards to promote infill development and more attention to issues of affordable housing and rural economic development. Porter, 1998. More recently, Florida's governor has spearheaded an effort to reshape the state's growth management system, with specific attention to modeling the true fiscal impact of new development and to making the system more accessible and responsive to public input. As a consequence, growth management in Florida is currently at a crossroads. Changes to the system are clearly in the works, but the changes have not yet been finalized, and the ultimate form of growth management in the state remains unclear. Resi is 1 i.e. perceived need for, Irol Helana Enyant. Using explanatory variables routinely found in the literature on resident attitudes towards growth management, we explored the perceived need for growth controls in both 1985 and 2001. Table I summarizes results from these analyses. This table shows the percentage of respondents who perceived a need to stop or control growth in their community in each survey year. For example, in 1985, 71.8% of all respondents perceived a need to stop or control growth in their community, compared to 6.J% in 2001, a decline of 4.1%. The table also summarizes the results of chi-square tests for variables at a given point in time, along rows below each variable heading, and the difference in proportions tests to determine a statistically significant change. Chapin and Connerly, Attitudes Towards Growth Management in Florida. 445. Over time, in the DOP test columns. For example, in 1985, the chi-square analysis found no statistically significant difference in perceived need for growth management across race, 71.8% for whites, 71.9% for blacks, but a significant difference was found in 2001, 74.3% for whites, 57.5% for blacks. For whites, there was no statistically significant change in perception of need for growth controls from 1985 to 2001, the decline of 2.5% was not significant, but for blacks there was a statistically significant decrease. The decline of 14.4% was statistically significant at the 0.95 level. In reviewing the findings for 1985, the 1985 columns. Table I illustrates the broad-based perceived need for growth controls in that year. Across the entire sample, almost 72% of respondents indicated that growth in their COMM unit needed to be stopped or controlled. FI's perception of high need was mirrored across almost every population subgroup. In only one case across all OFT variables did less than 65% of respondents indicate that growth needed to be controlled, respondents in largely rural North Florida. While certain variables show statistically significant inter-variable variation, Florida native income, housing tenure, and region, perceived need for growth controls was very high across all variables. Table I indicates that in 2001, Floridians continued to support growth management at nearly the same level as they did in 1985. While the drop from 71.8 to 6% is statistically significant, over two-thirds of states' residents still believed that growth in their communities should be stopped or controlled. However, the broad-based coalition supportive of growth management in 1985 had fragmented by 2001, see the 2001 columns. Whereas there was no variation across basic demographic variables in 1985, by 2001 blacks, Hispanics, males, and younger respondents perceived significantly less need for growth controls than whites, females, and older respondents. Similarly, lower-income households and renters were less likely to support growth management than higher-income households and homeowners. At a more basic level, the threshold of 65% that only one variable fell below in 1985 was now broken 7 times, with an eighth coming in at that threshold. Whereas the 1985 survey found similar levels of perceived need for growth controls across the population, By 2001 this perception varied markedly across fundamental demographic and socio-economic lines. Underscoring this finding that the coalition supporting growth management had fragmented by 2001, Table I also reveals that between 1985 and 2001 the perceived need for growth management fell significantly across 15 of 25 variables investigated. See the DOP test columns. Particularly noteworthy was the decline in perceived need for growth controls amongst blacks, Hispanics, males, renters, lower and medium income households, and South Florida residents. While the need for growth controls had traction amongst all groups in 1985, by 2001 perceived need for growth controls varied markedly across the population. In 2001, minorities and respondents of lower socioeconomic status perceived less of a need for growth controls, whereas high-income households and whites perceived a steady or increasing need for these controls. Super asterisk 4a, I avirnu iit whole and maya I roth. A second question asked in both 1985 and 2001 provides a more direct assessment of resident support for government-led growth management. Respondents who indicated that they thought growth in their communities needed to be stopped or controlled were then asked whether or not government should play a role in managing growth in their communities. The idea behind this question was that although people might wish to limit growth in their communities, they may also be loath to see government play a strong role in limiting private development. In a state such as Florida, where Republicans have replaced conservative Democrats as the dominant political faction, it was reasoned that residents' fear of government intrusion might limit overall support for growth management. Table 2 summarizes the findings from this line of inquiry, indicating the level of support for a government role in managing growth. Like 7able I, this table shows the results of both the chi-square analysis for each variable in a given year, in the chi-square rows, and the difference proportions test to determine statistically significant changes between 1985 and 2001. DOP test columns. In 1985, 3/4 of all respondents who perceived a need for growth controls were supportive of a government role in managing growth. Underscoring the broad-based support for growth controls found when investigating perceived needs. Table 2 shows that the level of support for a government role in managing growth was high across all groups, with no individual variable falling below 70%. Supporting this broad-based view, the statistical analysis also found that support for growth management varied across only one variable region off-state, as respondents in North Florida were significantly less supportive of a government role in growth management efforts than residents in other regions. A comparison of these results with those from 2001 reveals a decline in support for a government role in growth management. Whereas in 1985 no variable fell below 70% support, by 2001 only two variables broke the 70% support level, Hispanics and renters. Table 2 reinforces the conclusion that the broad-based support for 446 Journal of the American Planning Association, Autumn 2004, Vol 70, No. 4. Lavorange, Rontrelou 1985. All respondents 67.7% minus 4.1%. Respondents favor A for Growley C8IU, 85-2 CCI. Demographic variables. Race whites blacks 71.8%, 71.9%, 74.3%, 57 to 5%, 2.5% minus 14.4%. Gender males females X age 67.1%, 43.5%, 71.1%, 66.6% minus 23.6%. 18 to 29 30 to 45 46 to 59 65.7%, 73.1%, 5.4% minus 6.5%. 60 plus 72.0%, 71.6%, 63.9%, 70.3%, minus 8.3%, minus 1.3%. X. Ethnicity Hispanics. 69.0%, 71.7%, 70.9%, 73.9%. X. Florida native yes no. 55.7%, 66.8%, 71.9%, 72.3%. Minus 13.3%, minus 4.9%, 1.0%, minus 1.6%. X. Sorry IKMOEMI variables educational attainment no college some college grad housing tenure own rent 69.6% 74.0% 75.4% 65.5% 67.5% 71.1% minus 4.1% minus 6.5% minus 4.3% household income low medium high 69.6% 77.2% 69.5% 59.4% 70.5% 76.4%. Minus 10.2%. Minus 6.7% 6.9%. 74.0% 66.7%. 71.7% 59.0%. Minus 2.3% minus 7.7%. Volatile variable registered political party Republican 71.5% Democrat Independent. Ye. I. 2. E/Lyle A area Bluff region of the state. 71.1%. 71.5% J6.I%. 67.0% 70.4%. Minus 0.4% minus 4.5% minus 5.7%. North Central South. 59.7% 77.8% 72.5%. 65.0% 73.2% 62.5%. 5.3% minus 4.6%. Minus 10.0%. X. Notes. Survey question, do you feel growth in your community should be stopped, limited, or not controlled at all? Results show the percentage of those who believed growth should be stopped or limited. DOP represents a difference of proportions test for 1985 versus SOI. X represents a chi-square test for a given variable in a given year. */I.10 P.05 P.01 both chi-square and difference of proportions. Table I perceived need for growth controls in Florida, 1985 and 2001. Chapin and Connerly, Attitudes Towards Growth Management in Florida. 447. Respond Phils. Kespoyolinels favoring government Roy 1985. Favoring T-roll. 2. CI. Dov. All respondents reply race whites blacks ethnicity Hispanics X Florida native yes no X. 75.s%. 63.7%. Variables. 75.2%, 72.5%, 62.1%, 69.8%, minus 13.1%, minus 2.7% gender males females X age 84.9%, 76.1%, 77.6%, 73.7%, 65.2%, 62.8%, minus 12.4%, minus 10.9%. Minus 8.8%. 18 to 29 30 to 45 46 to 59 60 plus X. 78.1%, 74.9%, 71.6%, 76.4%. 69.6%, 68.6%, 64.2%, 55.6%. Minus 8.5%, minus 6.3%, minus 7.4%, minus 20.8%. 78.8%, 75.0%. 66.1%, 62.9%. Minus 12.7%, minus 12.1%. So IOEOEONIC variables educational attainment no college some college C. Grad X housing tenure own rent 75.6%, 75.8%, 61.3%, 71.3%, minus 14.3%, minus 4.5%, 74.6%, 72.0%, 81.3%, 67.2%, 59.7%, 64.0%, minus 7.4%, minus 12.3%, minus 17.3%. Household income low medium high 74.6%, 76.4%, 76.9%, 63.6%, 65.6%, 64.7%, minus 11.0%, minus 10.8%, minus 12.2%. /ARIABLE registered political party Republican Democrat Independent X notes 73 to 5% JJ.G percent 76.2%, 60.2%, 66.4%, 62.2%, minus 13.3%, minus 11.5%, minus 14.0%. Me. Evlul variable region of the state North Central South 71.0%, 73.7%, 80.7%, 54.9%, 64.9%, 69.9%, minus 16.1%, minus 8.8%, minus 10.8%. Survey question asked of those who believed that growth should be controlled or stopped: should the government do something about growth in your community? Results indicate the percent of respondents who answered yes. DOP represents a difference of proportions test for 1985 versus 2001. A represents a CHL-squark test for a given variable in a given year. P.10 P.05/.01, both chi-square and Diddertonsoi proportions. Table 2. Support for a government role in managing growth in Florida, 1985 and 2001. 448 Journal of the American Planning Association, Autumn 2004, Volume 70, Number 4. Growth management that existed in 1985 had splintered by 2001. While in 1985 there was little variation across population subgroups, by 2001 there were statistically significant variations in support for a government role across race, ethnicity, age, housing tenure, and region. As for the change in attitudes over time, overall support for a government role in managing growth fell significantly between 1985 and 2001, down almost 12 percentage points. Further, across 24 of the 25 variables these declines were statistically significant. The only exception was blacks. The decline in support is particularly striking toward college graduates, homeowners, and whites, groups that would be thought to support government-led growth management initiatives. Among groups expected not to back government intervention, such as Republicans and more rural North Floridians, support also declined substantially and significantly. Overall, this finding is remarkably robust, as support for a government role in managing growth declined across almost every subset of the population, including demographic, socioeconomic, and contextual variables. The results from this survey provide further evidence of bifurcation of support for growth management in the state, albeit in a different direction than that shown in Table I. By 2001, among those respondents who felt that growth was a problem, minorities, younger residents, renters, and Central and South Floridians showed greater support for a government role in growth management. This second finding may at first seem at odds with the finding on perceived need for growth controls. Recall that minorities, younger voters, and respondents in lower-income households perceived less of a need for growth controls in 2001. See Table I. Intuitively this finding makes sense. These groups are in many cases the have-nots in Florida. For them, managing growth is not a problem at Tactungktouth. However, once individuals in these have-not groups do perceive Ktouth as a problem, then it is little surprise that they show greater support for a government role in managing growth. These groups are accustomed to government intervention to address problems. Resident support for government-led growth management fell between 1985 and 2001. To address this question, we first discuss the historical and political contexts of growth management in 1985 and 2001, as we behave. These contexts partly explain the decline in support. We also briefly characterize the state economies at both times, finding that the economy was not likely a factor behind changes in resident attitudes. Following this discussion, we provide results from other IVLP5 questions that augment the political contextual argument. The L**OLC and political context. U. 8J and 2. CI in 1985, Florida was still in labor with CTOUth management, as the state legislature and governor were finalizing legislation for one of the most comprehensive approaches to managing growth the country had yet seen. At the time of the first survey, the long, difficult local comprehensive planning process and the contentious state review of these local planning documents still lay in the future. The implications of the decision by the state legislature to disassociate funding from the final legislation and the actual impact of the concurrency provision on development patterns remained unknown. In short, to survey respondents in 1985, growth management in Florida remained unblemished, a vision of good planning yet to be spoiled by the realities of day-to-day implementation. The survey results from 1985 almost certainly reflect heightened expectations amongst Florida's residents as to the effectiveness of this approach to managing growth. Support for growth management would be expected to be high in these heady early days, otherwise, this comprehensive approach to managing growth probably would not have made it through the legislature. The high level of support for managing growth that existed across all subsets of the population therefore reflects the success of the sponsors of growth management in marketing the concept to Floridians. Moreover, in 1985, Florida's drive for growth management was led in part by the state's governor, Bob Ira Ham Graham, who was elected governor in 1978 and re-elected in 1982. Was a champion of growth management and environmental protection in Florida. Graham had led the Save Our Coasts, Save Our Rivers, and Save Our Everglades programs in the early 1980s, and the legislature had adopted bills in 1983 and 1984 to protect the state's waters and wetlands. In his speech opening the 1985 legislative session, Governor Graham made passing a growth management bill a priority. Hausernian, 2001, Woodburn, 1998. Contrast the situation in 1985 with that in Zoe, by which time the state's system of growth management had declined. Sup. Ort for Mana Oi unit in Ilorida. Taken as a whole, these findings indicate that while Floridians continue to perceive a need toward growth controls, they are less supportive of a government toll in achieving this outcome. It seems reasonable, then, to inquire. Chapin and Connerly, Attitudes Towards Growth Management in Florida. 449. Been in play for over a decade. The first set of local comprehensive plans had been prepared. The state's community planning agency, the Department of Community Affairs, had reviewed, commented on, and in some cases rejected some of these local plans, and the required updates to these plans had been prepared as dictated by the legislation. During this period, development was directed to areas where infrastructure was available, sometimes promoting sprawl rather than containing it. Loopholes in the concurrency requirement had been identified, resulting in new regulations to close them, and shortages in funding for new and existing infrastructure needs were experienced throughout the state. In short, the system designed in the mid-1980s had been put into practice, in the process exposing shortcomings and problems of the approach as initially designed. Porter, 1998. While this visionary but imperfect system was attempting to manage growth across the state, much of central and southern Florida continued to boom as retirees, workers in the tourist industry, and wealthy households came to take advantage of warm weather, Disney World, and the lack of a state income tax. This growth had also begun to spread into northern Florida, generating problems in rural counties formerly passed over by the state's phenomenal growth. A final, equally important change occurred in the political orientation of the state. In the 1990s, Republicans came into control of both houses of the legislature and the governor's mansion with Jeb Bush's election in 1998. Governor Bush proposed revamping Florida's growth management laws, predicated on the idea that the current system was ineffective and served only as a deterrent to growth. With the appointment of a new Secretary of the Department of Community Affairs in 1999, the Governor's Office began a campaign to revamp and rewrite the state's growth management system, convening a Growth Management Study Commission, GMSC, in 2001 to investigate growth issues and to make recommendations for improving this system. One of the major recommendations to emerge from this commission was that the state should have much less oversight responsibility and serve primarily as a technical resource in the preparation of local plans. GMSC 2001. Flueluoioic, Onchksai, H5AIUL2, T1. Previous research has suggested that the state of the economy is a factor in resident attitudes towards growth controls. Connerly and Frank, T986, Logan, 1978, Pratash and Baldassari, 1983. It is argued that in tough economic times, residents are less supportive of growth management, as individuals tend to be more interested in policies that promote growth rather than those that attempt to control it. A review of Florida's economic context does not provide much evidence for this hypothesis. State economic indicators in both 1985 and 2001 suggest that at the time of each of these surveys, the state economy was generally healthy. For example, the unemployment rate was 6.0% in 1985 and 4.8% in 2001, both at or below national rates. Bureau of Economic and Business Research, 1986, 2002. The state economy was growing in both of these periods, although at a faster rate in the mid-1980s. Perhaps the only evidence supportive of this economic context argument lies in the relative trajectories of the state economy in 1985 compared to 2001. In 1985, the state and national economy had emerged from the economic recession of the early 1980s and the overall economic outlook was improving. In contrast, in 2001 the Florida economy was in many ways better than that of 1985, but the economic boom of the R990s had begun rawhide, and the economic forecast for the state painted a picture of an economy that was slowing down. Despite this somewhat dreary economic outlook in 2001, survey results suggest that residents were more concerned about the economy at the time of the 1985 survey. In both surveys, respondents were asked to identify the most important problem facing the state. In 1985, 13.9% of respondents indicated the economy was the most important problem, compared to only 7.8% in 2001. Reflecting the stated priorities of the governors in each time period, in 1985 the modal response for the most important problem was community development, and in 2001 education was deemed the most important issue. Taken as a whole, these data seem to suggest that the state of the economy was not a major factor in explaining the different results generated by the 1985 and 2001 surveys. In CHTS IROMNIAXIFAPS. While no questions in the surveys were directed specifically towards why residents did or did not support a government role in managing growth, other survey questions provide insights as to why there was decline in support. These questions focused upon three broad issues. 1. Resident familiarity with growth management, asked in 2001 only. 2. The impact of the state's system of growth management on problems related to growth, such as TRUV. The 2001 survey results therefore provide insights into resident attitudes after years of struggling to implement and debug a very complex approach to managing growth. Given the significant problems with the approach as initially designed, the continued growth in the state, and the significant shift in political leadership, a priori would be expected that support for government intervention in growth management would wane. For SO Journal of the American Planning Association, Alicum 2004, Volume 70, Number 4. FIC, Water Supply and the Condition of the Environment, asked in 2001 only, and 3. The appropriate government level for managing growth, asked in both surveys. Resident familiarity with and understanding of state's system of growth management has long been an issue in Florida. It is widely held that the comprehensive plan amendment process, reviews of developments of Region A impacts, and the many government layers involved in the process have created barriers to resident input. One oft primary policy recommendations oft GMSC appointed by Governor Bush revolved around this issue. The GMSG's final report states that Florida needs to empower residents to better understand and participate in the growth management process. GMSC, 2001, p. 2. The 2001 survey data support the contention that the state's growth management system is not well understood. Survey respondents were asked about their level of familiarity with the system. Less than one-third stated that they were familiar, at any level, with the state's growth management system. See Figure I. What is remarkable about this finding is that growthists have been at the forefront of state and local politics in Florida for the better part of 30 years, and that the state's growth management system has routinely been discussed and debated in the state legislature since its inception in 1985. This finding is ironic because the system of growth management established in 1985 centered on a comprehensive planning process that required resident involvement in the initial preparation of local comprehensive plans and continued resident involvement in refining and updating these plans on an annual basis. While groups such as 1000 Friends of Florida and the Sierra Club have played important roles at the state and local levels in implementing growth management laws, it appears that the vast majority of residents remain unfamiliar with state-led growth management. Support for government-led growth management may also be affected by the perceived ineffectiveness of the growth management system. To acquire some sense of perceived impacts of state's system of growth management, a question on the 2001 FAPS 3.skcd respondents about their perceptions of impacts of growth management on traffic, local water supply, the environment, and disaster preparedness. This question was asked only of those respondents who stated that they were /familiar or somewhat familiar with the system. Table 3 illustrates the responses to this question, generally indicating that respondents believed that growth management has not been effective in addressing these issues. Particularly striking are the results for traffic, as over 3/5 of respondents indicated that growth management has negatively varied 2.9%. Somewhat Himalaya. Not familiar 68.6%. Figure I resident familiarity with Florida's growth management SJSTTRM, 2001. Source, FSUC and TV Research L.ib, 2001. N equals 1085. Impacted traffic conditions. Also of interest is the finding that of those familiar with the state's growth management system, a greater percentage responded that it has had a negative impact on the environment. In only one of 4 issues, disaster preparedness was the perceived positive impact greater than the perceived negative impact. 1 Taken as a whole, these results strongly indicate that Florida's residents perceive the state's growth management system to have been ineffective at addressing key issues. What should be particularly disturbing to growth management advocates is that this group of respondents is not only more knowledgeable about the system, but also more supportive of growth controls. An analysis of familiarity variable determined that familiarity with the state system is predicted in part by 2 factors, I, level of interest in state and national politics, and 2, general support for growth controls. Chapin, 2004. Respondents to the growth management effectiveness question are in many ways the marketing demographic for this legislation, active individuals supportive of growth management. Yet Table 3 underscores that even within this core constituency there is a strong sentiment that the state's system has not positively impacted growth issues. One other survey question provides insights into the erosion of support for growth management. In both 1985 and 2000, those respondents who stated that they support a government role in managing growth were then asked what level of government should take /N2R responsible. Chapin and Connerly, Attitudes Towards Growth Management in Florida. 4SI. Issue IRAFC. Local Water Supply Environment Disaster LT Preparedness. NT Galive. 60.7%, 30.7%, 40.9%, 24.4%. Neutral. 23.s%, 497%, 26.4%, 32.6%. Positive. 15.8%, 19.6%, 32.6%, 43.0%. N. 336 3.U 337 328. Sir/Thai question, please indicate whether you think that Florida's system OI growth management has had a positive effect on these items, a negative effect, or a neutral effect. Asked only of respondents who indicated familiarity with the system. Table 3. Perceived impacts of growth management on growth issues. 200T. Are largely unfamiliar with the system, they don't think it works, and there is a growing belief that the existing structure of system is unsuitable to managing growth. Despite these problems, however, it is clear that growth management is here to stay in Florida. Florida continues to be among the fastest growing states in the nation, and growth issues remain at the forefront of public debate at the local and state levels. 2/3 of Florida's residents continue to perceive growth to be a problem in their communities. Even as Governor Bush attempts to remake the Department of Community Affairs into a user-friendly organization oriented towards providing technical support to our local comprehensive planning efforts, the debate in Florida has centered not on whether or not growth management is needed, but what form growth management should take and what the appropriate role the state government is in these efforts. ITY, federal, state, county, or city/town. Between 1985 and 2001 there was a shift in resident preference from the state letito the coimty/F/W, results not shown here but available from the authors. Respondents in 1985 reflected the nascent system, with the greatest number of respondents assigning the state primary responsibility for managing growth. By 2001, however, the county level emerged as the modal response, up over 12 percentage points while the state level lost an almost equal share. By 2001, almost 2/3, 66.4%, OT respondents supportive of a government role in managing growth felt that the local or county level should have primary responsibility for growth management, up from 51.6% in 1985. This growing dissatisfaction with state-level intervention may have been a key factor in Governor Bush's ongoing efforts to devolve responsibility for controlling local growth to local governments. Kennedy and Newman, 2002. While changes in resident support toward growth management between 1985 and 2001 suggest the impact that a change in gubernatorial leadership has had on public support toward growth management, the public's growing preference toward local control also makes it easier for Governor Bush to push for the devolution of growth management responsibilities. When taken together, the survey data provides some insights as to why support for growth management in Florida fell significantly between 1985 and 2001. Any system that is poorly grasped by residents, deemed ineffective at addressing key problems, and viewed as a poor organizational response to these problems is almost certain to lose support, even within its core constituency. In Florida, all of these shortcomings are perceived to exist. Residents. Conclusion. Taken as a whole, these results indicate that there is still substantial support for the general idea of growth management in Florida. Overall, the state's residents continue to support growth management, with 2/3 supporting efforts to limit or control growth in both 1985 and 2001. While debate continues over the form and content of growth management policy in Florida, these survey results make it clear that growth is still an issue of great importance to the state's citizens. At the same time, these survey results also point to two potential concerns. First, the across-the-board support found in 1985 has now eroded. Support for limiting or controlling growth is now more likely to be found among affluent white homeowners. This means that growth management now appears to be more of a choice issue than it was in 1985. FIs may enable opponents of growth management to use economic class issues, such as housing affordability, to attack it. Planners must be prepared to identify ways to bring these disaffected groups back into the growth management fold. It does growth management no good to be viewed as a boutique cause. Second, support for government intervention in growth management declined among nearly all groups between 1985 and 2001. This decline appears to reflect the difficulty associated with the implementation of growth management that usually results when government attempts to carry out a complicated piece of legislation. At the same time, it also likely reflects the different tone set by Cy Werner Bush than the one set by T. Governor Graham. A critical question is whether a strong governor. 452 Journal of American Planning Association, Autumn 2004, Volume 70, Number 4. Torial advocate for growth management, like former Governor Graham, could boost public support for government control of growth. Given that most Floridians remain unfamiliar with the state's Growth Management Act, it appears there is room for a pro-growth management governor to step forward and influence the public's familiarity with and support for this legislation. In addition to interpreting these results for Florida, this study offers some insights to other states that have chosen a growth management course. Our survey results show that citizen attitudes towards growth management do indeed change over time. These results illustrate that support for growth management may differ across subgroups of the population, and these differences may increase over time. Taken together, these findings make it clear that citizen attitudes should be monitored so that policymakers can track and respond properly to these attitudinal shifts. Florida's experience also indicates that popular support for growth management is likely to persist in mature growth management states, even in the face of frustration with government implementation of legislation and the emergence of political regimes that are less supportive of such efforts. While changing conditions have contributed to a decline in support for government intervention and a narrowing of the constituency for growth management to one that is less representative of states' residents, growth issues remain of great importance to citizens. The planning community in Florida and other mature growth management states must recognize these changing conditions and their related impacts and respond in ways that bring together this still broad constituency supportive of managing growth. Acknalp special thanks to colleague Gayla Smutny, David Rasmussen of DeVoe Center, and Mary Stiesman of FSU Survey Research Lab for their help on this project. This research was sponsored in part by a grant from the DeVoe Tuntet for the study of critical issues in economic policy and government in the Florida State University College of Social Sciences. Notes I. The 2001 FAPS was administered in the summer of 2001, prior to the events of September 11. References Bollins, S. 1990. Constituencies for Limitation and Regionalism, Approaches to Growth Management. Urban AIRS Quarterly, 2 TF, I 46-67. Benzaduk, E., and Gale, D., Zoe. Innovation and Reform, Intentional Inaction and Tactical Breakdown, The Implementation Record of Flotida Concurrency Pollock. Urban Affairs Review, I 66, 86-87I. Bureau of Economic and Business Research. 1986, Florida Statistical Abstract. Gainesville, University OT Florida. Bureau of Economic and Business Research. 2002, Florida Statistical Abstract. Gainesville, University of Florida. Chapin, T. 2004. Variations in Citizen Familiarity with Growth Management Processes, Evidence from Florida. Urban Affairs Review, _4, 441-460. Connerly, C. 1986. Growth Management Concern, The Impact of its Definitions on Support for Local Growth Control. Fieverin-Meany, and Behavior, 18, 6, 707-732. Connerly, C., and Frank, J. 1986. Predicting Support FOT Local Growth Controls. Social Sciences Quarterly, 6/I, 572-586. Deacon, E. 1989. Growth Control, A Summary and Review of Empirical Research. Erhan Land. 4SIJ, 16-2.2. Dowell, D. 1980. An Examination of Population Growth Managing Communities. Policy Studies Journal Chi, 414-427. Florida Growth Management Study Commission. 2001, February. A Livable Florida for Today and Tomorrow. Retrieved October 2001, from http://www.horadagrowth.org/pdf/gmsc.pdf Florida State University Survey Research Lab, 1985. Florida Annual Polity Survey, IPHJ. Retrieved March 2004, from http://www.fsu.edir/surveys/faps/codebook.s/fapsa985.htm Florida State University Survey Research Lab, 2001. Florida Annual Policy Survey, 2001. Retrieved March 2004, from http://www.l-su.edu servc/faps/phi, ps200lhtm Florida State University Survey Research Lab, 2004. Florida Annual Policy Survey. Retrieved March 2004, from http://www.fsu.edu/survey-faps/index, HDM Gale, D. and Hart, S. 1992. Public Support FOT Local Comprehensive Planning Undet Statewide Growth Management, Insights from Maine. Journal of Planning Education and Research, 7/3, 192-205. Hausermann, J. 2001, December 28. Bush to Try Again with Schools, Growth Bill. St. Petersburg Times, PBL Kennedy, J. and Newman, J. 2002, December 14. Governor Bush wants Secretary of State to tackle South Orlando Sentinel, PAI. NAPE, G.J., 1987. Self-Interest and Voter Support for Oregon's Land Use Camelfie. Journal of the American Planning Association, I. 92-97. Koenig, J. 1990. Down to the Wire in Florida. Planning, FTFLIO, 4-11. Local Government Comprehensive Planning and Land Development Regulation Act. FLASTAT 163-30-161-32-42, 1985. Logan, J. 1978. Growth, Politics, and the Stratification of Places. American Journal of Sociology, 84, 1, 404-416. Pelham, T. 1992. Adequate Public Facilities Requirements, Reflections on Florida's Concurrency System for Managing Growth. Florida State University Law Review, 19. 973-1052 Porter, D. 1998. The States, Growing Smarter? In Urban IND Institute, ed. S. NART Growth, Economy, Community, Environment, pages 28-35. Washington, D.C., Urban Land Institute. Pratash, W., and Baldassari, M., 1983. Growth Policies and Community Status, A Test and Modification of Logan's Theory. Urban Affairs Quarterly. Is. 397-412 Whites J., 1999. Sprawl Iristing, State Programs to Guide Growth. Chicago, American Planning Association. Woodburn, K., 1998. Were the 80s our environmental peak? Florida Sustainable Communities Center State/Regional News. Retrieved January 25, 2003, from http://sustainable.state.fl.us/fdi/fscc/news/state/ken3.htm.